Greetings, this is Peter Williams, and for week 5, Special Needs and Disabilities, I'm going to be discussing Say What You Will by Cammie McGovern. It is a young adult romance novel, and it relates to this week's topic because it deals with the challenges faced by 2 high school students, with one of them living with OCD and the other one is living with cerebral palsy. The story begins with main characters Amy and Matthew sending emails to each other, and Amy is expressing to Matthew how happy that she is that he is signed up to be her peer helper. And in discussing this, Matthew ends up looking back on how he had first known Amy and growing up together and noticing all the things that she went through and challenges that she went through growing up, and how it was revealed how well written she was and how intelligent that she was. And also a recent essay that she had written as far as her living with cerebral palsy and how she was okay with it and how it was very inspiring for the other students. But he ends up talking with others, talking about it in class and stating that he doesn't feel that she's being truthful. He doesn't think she's being honest. And she later confronts him about it, asking, why are you saying that it's not true? And he's saying, well, because I don't think that it is true. Because you're saying that it's okay that you've never been to parties, but how would you know that it's okay that you've never been to a party if you've never actually been to a party? And so Amy's response is that she ends up realizing, you're right, that's true. And this leads her to telling her mom that she wants to trade out her assistants in school with peer assistants, because she realized that she doesn't have any friends and there's no way that she's going to be able to make friends if there's always a teacher around her. And so it took a little motivation from her mother, but eventually she did say yes. And then this leads Amy to asking Matthew that she wants him to apply, which he does, but he doesn't feel like that he's up to the challenge, but he still does. And once the peer assistance, once it starts, Amy and Matthew are the only ones that really seem to have like a sort of chemistry between them. And Matthew ends up seeming like he's a true friend to her, and eventually he does confess his rituals with her. Basically, the rituals related to his OCD. And this eventually leads Amy to asking Matthew to help her out in the after school program for a yearbook. And she's definitely realizing that she has an attraction to him. And this eventually leads Matthew to encourage her to take a public speaking course. And in her first speech, she ends up talking about making friends and how everybody has issues, and kind of in so many words relates to Matthew's disability. And he takes it very personally. He leaves, and he later confronts her about it. And she addresses that she thinks that his OCD is getting worse. And of course, also she gives him a book to read as far as getting research on it and ways to cope with it. And she also ends up giving him assignments as a way to help with his OCD. And one of his first major assignments is that Amy asks him to take Sarah out for tacos. Now, Sarah is one of the other peer aides that's been helping her. And the reason why that she recommends that Matthew take her out for tacos is because in the past he used to have a crush on her. Excuse me. And when Matthew takes her out for tacos, they talk about Amy, and Sarah ends up revealing that Amy has applied to 20 colleges. And Matthew didn't know this, and he ends up getting anxiety about it, and he ends up going right to the bathroom and is washing his hands all the way up to his elbows. And at this point in the story, Amy hasn't revealed it yet, but the story reveals that she was accepted into Stanford. And she ends up telling Matthew via email, and Matthew never responds to it. And then once it's out in the open, there's a big commotion, and Amy basically ends up kind of sort of turning into like a town celebrity because she's been accepted. And this leaves Matthew to be angry at himself, and he tells his mom that he wants to see a psychologist, and he eventually gets himself a prescription. And Matthew's next assignment from Amy is that she wants him to apply for a job at the movie theater, which he does end up getting. And his first day on the job, he ends up going into the bathroom to do a checkup, and he ends up spending, he ends up cleaning the bathroom for a whole hour, but he still doesn't get fired because actually it turns out that his boss, Mr. Ilson, has OCD as well. Excuse me one moment. As he's been taking the medication, Matthew, it doesn't work for him at first, but eventually as time goes on, he does start to get looser and funnier in chats with Amy. And they end up eventually start to discuss the possibility of going to prom, which eventually they do. They do decide on it. And Matthew does pick up Amy to go to the prom. And it ends up being revealed that Amy and her mom ended up having a discussion about Matthew because her mom finds out that he has OCD, and she doesn't want her to see him at all during the summer. It's like basically once we get to the summer, you're all done seeing him. And it's also revealed that for prom, Sanjay, who is another one of her peer helpers, and who Sarah also has a crush on, and Sarah is going to the prom with Sanjay, it's revealed that he found a way to smuggle booze in Amy's walker. And once they get to prom, Matthew goes to the bathroom, checks his coat pocket, and ends up finding a note from Amy's parents saying that after prom, you're done. We don't want you to associate with our daughter anymore. This gives him an attack, and he really wants to wash his hands, but he basically stays in there for like half an hour and calming himself down and getting himself under control. And when he comes out again, Amy's gone. And it's revealed that while Matthew was in the bathroom, Sanjay intercepted Amy while she was by herself, tells her to kind of come over into this corner where Matthew can't see her, and is basically inviting all of his jock buddies to come up and get drinks out of her walker. And so eventually, later, when Amy's kind of freed from the situation, she goes to try and find Matthew, and he ends up finding her. Amy ends up finding Matthew comforting Sarah, because while Matthew was looking for Amy, he ends up finding Sarah crying because Sarah is very upset over what Sanjay is doing. She doesn't approve of using Amy in this way. And so Amy sees Matthew comforting Sarah, and so she ends up storming off, and she ends up getting lost even more in the prom. And then eventually Sanjay finds her and says that Matthew is going to be giving Sarah a ride home. And then Sanjay says, well, if he's stealing my date, how about I give you a ride home? And she agrees to it. Pardon me one moment. Now, Sanjay gives her a ride home, and once they're there, the parents are like, oh, it's so fantastic. We love Sanjay. He's amazing. And they decide to leave Amy and Sanjay alone by themselves. And while they're doing that, it eventually leads to Amy inviting Sanjay upstairs into her bedroom. And after the prom, Matthew and Amy send each other several emails arguing with each other, and Amy expresses how she thinks that Matthew basically ditched her at the prom and left with Sarah, but Matthew states, no, I was offering to give Sarah a ride home, but we were all going to ride together because she didn't want to ride with Sanjay because he's a total creep, basically. And so eventually they reconcile, and they start spending time with each other again. And then Amy tells Matthew that she wants him to come over during the summer to swim, and it would be during the daytime when their parents would be home. So they would be meeting in secret. And as they get towards the end of the summer, Matthew has a surprise for Amy, and they end up going to the beach together. And she ends up getting to see seals and dolphins, and it's her first time going to the beach ever. And then when they get to Amy's home, she finds a note saying that her parents wouldn't be home until 10. And so she invites Matthew into her home and upstairs into her bedroom, and she discusses how they want to be boyfriend and girlfriend and brings up the issue of sex. And then she ends up revealing to Matthew that she ended up having sex with Sanjay because she just wanted to understand what it was like before she ended up trying with Matthew, so she wanted to understand it. And when she tells Matthew this, his response is to leave. He just gets up and he leaves, and he doesn't even give Amy a goodbye text before she ends up going to Stanford. And at college, Amy sends us, or she doesn't actually send these emails. She types a series of emails for Matthew, but she never sends them, and where she basically expresses her love for him. And now she's angry that he just basically took off and, didn't even say goodbye to her. But in the email that she does actually send him, she says, "I need your help." And during this time, it reflects on Matthew, and it shows how he's becoming more part of the group at the theater, and they're all becoming his friends. And when he does end up getting that email from Amy saying that she needs help, he's very happy to hear from her. But he tries to contact her, and he can't get in touch with her. And he ends up finding out through her mom that she's actually left school and nobody knows where she is. So he ends up reaching out to all of their friends. This includes Sarah, Sanjay, and Chloe, who is another peer helper that she had. And Chloe reveals that she did go up to visit Amy, and she looks really sick and doesn't look too good at all. And then he ends up hearing back from Sarah saying that Amy's okay, but she doesn't want anybody to know where she is, and that basically Amy would let Matthew know what's going on in about a week or so. And at this point in the story, it flashes back to when Amy actually started college, and it reveals that her parents set it up so that her dorm would be right next to the infirmary, so she wouldn't even be living in the actual dorm with the other students. So she's basically cut off from everybody at college. And it's a very lonely experience for her. She doesn't have any chance to socialize and make friends. She ends up making one friend via chat room, a student by the name of Brooks, and she believes that he has Asperger's syndrome. Then eventually she does get sick, and she gets examined in the infirmary, and it's revealed that she's pregnant. And when this happens, she takes a cab to a Planned Parenthood clinic, and she asks the doctors about adoption because she thinks that it's been too late for her to have an abortion. And at this point in the story, it ends up being revealed by her parents that Brooks is actually the son of her dad's friend. And they actually asked Brooks to reach out to her because they basically wanted her to have friends that they picked out for her. So it's definitely yet another example of all the different ways that her mom is kind of controlling and is making a lot of decisions for Amy for her. But after Amy finds out that she's pregnant, she reaches out to Sarah. Sarah comes to pick her up and get her, and actually brings her to her father's house, who is Mr. Heffernan. So Amy at this point is now staying at Mr. Heffernan's house, and he's able to guess right away. It's like, okay, you're pregnant. And at this point, Amy does end up revealing to Matthew via email that she is pregnant, and then eventually tells him where she is. And then he goes to visit her briefly, and after his visit, she starts feeling a lot of pain. And then after this point, Mr. Heffernan ends up revealing that she was taken to the hospital due to complications with the baby. And at this point, the parents are informed as well, too. So the parents are there. Matthew is there. Mr. Heffernan is there. And the doctors state that she's having a bad reaction to the baby, and she would have to deliver the baby prematurely, because if she doesn't, it could actually end up killing her. So the premature birth, it would save her life, but then the baby would be born with complications similar to hers. And when Matthew comes to see her, she does tell Matthew that she wishes that Matthew was the father, because it's actually Sanjay that's the father. And she asks Matthew to reach out to the parents that she wants to adopt the baby and inform them of what's going on, because she wants to make sure that the parents are okay with the baby being born with issues, with, you know, possibly having the same issues that she does. And so Matthew does end up reaching out to them, and they say, yes, we would still like to adopt this baby. And from this point, Amy's parents they take a step back, and Matthew basically ends up becoming in charge of the negotiations and all the planning for the adoption and everything like that. And when the baby needs to be delivered, Amy's father asks him to suit up and go to surgery. And basically he's going to be keeping her company. He's going to be keeping her company while they're performing a C-section, because she's actually conscious during the time when they do that. And the baby ends up being born 2 pounds and 6 ounces. And when Amy is going through her final treatment of antibiotics, Matthew is reading to her. And then eventually Amy tells Matthew that she wants him to be her boyfriend, and asks him to lie on top of her because she wants to feel his weight on top of her. And when he does that, they end up kissing. And that night, Matthew goes home and he ends up cooking a dinner for his mother and Mr. Heffernan, who are they're sort of having a sort of date. And then when he sees Amy the next day to tell her about it, she informs Matthew that she's all done with treatment and they said that she can go home. And he brings up, for their plans, he's saying, I've been thinking, how about we get an apartment together, we can live together, and we can make it work. And Amy says, that's not what's going to happen. I need to go back to school, but she's going to transfer over to UC Berkeley, that's where Sarah goes. And this leads to a big argument with them, and Matthew ends up revealing to her that he quit his job so that he could spend all that time in the hospital with her. So all that time that he spent, he ended up losing his job for her. And after he leaves, he stops responding to Amy's messages, and he basically becomes a recluse and staying at home, and he doesn't leave home until January. And then when he finally leaves home, he does go to the theater to check up on everybody, and Mr. Ilson offers him his job back. He offers him 2 shifts, and then he ends up realizing that everybody that worked there pulled for him to get the job back, and that he has a really good group of friends. And with Amy back in school, she is depressed after having given birth to the baby. However, her switch to UC Berkeley, it really helps with her mood, and she's finally living in a real dorm, and she ends up discovering that she really likes playwriting. And after writing several plays, she writes a short play based on her and Matthew. It's not a direct, copy of their relationship, but it's certainly based on it. And this play ends up getting accepted into a festival, and she invites Matthew to come and see it. Nicole, Amy's mother, ends up giving Matthew a ride to the play, and he ends up running into Amy in the theater, and after having watched the play, he says it's fantastic, I think it's great, and she ends up revealing her love for him. And he doesn't say it directly, but in so many words he ends up saying, I love you too, and the story ends right there. And as far as the book's usefulness in understanding the culture, it does walk you through the various challenges that Matthew faces in having OCD, and also the challenges that Amy faces having cerebral palsy. To focus on Amy in particular, the book does talk about how the peer assistants, they do need to have training for choking hazards and seizure risks, because she can even choke on her own spit. It also talks about how Amy has a walker, and she cannot walk and talk at the same time because she needs a device to communicate. When Matthew is talking about viewing her growing up, he does address how when she was younger, she did need a bib for drool. and how she would, before she had a device, she would try and communicate, but you would mostly get vowel sounds, and it was very hard to understand her talk. And he also talks about how teachers growing up, they often made a lot of assumptions as far as what Amy felt. Like, oh, those children are making fun of her, and then another teacher, no, they're just trying to play a game. It also shows how intelligent Amy is, as far as even though she can't verbally communicate with a device, she's very intelligent. She's very she understands a great deal, and she's very intelligent. And it also addresses, it does make mention of how much weight she can carry, which is not a lot, which is why peer assistants, they need to carry her books for her. Peer assistants, they're also responsible for charging her device, so that way it doesn't run out of battery. She does need assistance eating certain foods, and she does need help in the bathroom as well. Even though she does need assistance eating, she is able to eat simple foods on her own. It also goes to show, in her saying that she wanted peer assistance, how she's able to advocate for herself and her own needs. As far as Matthew coming up to her and saying that he didn't believe that she was telling the truth, the book also makes mention through that people that don't suffer disabilities, they don't really, it's kind of hard for them to be direct and tell the truth. So it kind of shows how people can react to communicating with people with disabilities in a certain way. Like, it's very odd to think of somebody going up to somebody and they write this amazing essay and then just kind of go away saying, you know what, I think you're lying, you're not being truthful. It does make mention also of the specific types of devices that she had growing up, such as MindSpeak, Unity, and the Pathway 2000, which is the newest one that she's been using. And it actually emulates a teenage girl's voice. The book also mentions what caused Amy's cerebral palsy. She was born with an aneurysm the day after she was born because she was born prematurely. And it does also address certain moments in her life of prejudice, such as Mr. Heffernan in particular. Mr. Heffernan accused Amy's mother of basically helping Amy with certain assignments, like saying that I think you wrote this for her, and I don't have any evidence that she's actually completing the tests that I'm giving her. It's like, I think it's actually the assistant doing the work for her. The book also talks about Amy's physical features, such as that she has a curled bad arm, which also has a clenched fist. And also the facial expressions that she's able to do, such as raised eyebrows for excitement, a closed mouth but still making an O when she's concerned or she's concentrating, and an open mouth basically for everything else. Because due to having cerebral palsy, she has what's called a hemiplegic face. And coming back to when she was swimming with Matthew during the summer, she does make mention of how she has an unflattering life jacket, but she also enjoys the buoyancy of being in a pool. And she also talks about how theoretically trans fats cause seizures, so her mother never allowed her to have things like Pop-Tarts and things with trans fats. But she also talks about how, you know, there's no real evidence to really show that, and nobody really knows what causes seizures for sure. And even stating that she hasn't even had a seizure in 10 years. And when she gets to college, she ends up getting a PCA for assistance who helps her in the mornings and at night, as far as getting dressed, feeding, bathing. Now to talk about Matthew. Matthew, growing up, he didn't have any problems until he was in the 6th grade, and then he starts hearing voices telling him to wash his hands, and he ends up starting to worry more and more about a lot of things. And as he gets even older, his voices start telling him that he needs to check and make sure that the faucets are off, and he starts counting a lot of different things, such as the 24 steps that it takes to get to the bathroom. Also a collection of nighttime rituals that he has, and he basically keeps it all a secret. He even keeps it a secret from his mother. Amy's the first person that he reveals it to. And other rituals include going to the bathroom 6 times a day to check his underwear for skid marks, saying "excuse me" 7 times when he passes gas. Homework takes him a very long time to complete because he's constantly rechecking and rereading, and sometimes he doesn't even complete his homework at all because of that. And a huge part of his OCD is that he feels like everything is his fault. Like, in some sort of way, he caused something bad to happen. So it's basically like, okay, if I don't count the total number of blue tiles on the floor, somebody that I care about is going to die, basically. When he does start taking the medication, it doesn't help him at first, but over time it does start to regulate him, even though he still does suffer moments, but it is very beneficial for helping him. And when seeing his psychologist, he does confess that he's scared of stains and other bodies. So basically, coming back to when he walked out on Amy after she revealed that she had sex with Sanjay, it wasn't so much that he was heartbroken over it, but it was just the idea that she had sex, and the idea that he could end up having sex with her. It was like a reaction to a phobia, if you will. And to touch briefly on Brooks, he's a very minimal character in the story, but I'll bring him up as well just because Amy does make mention of him maybe having Asperger's. The book does make mention of him being socially awkward, posting stories in the chat room. He's posting a very long story, 1 line at a time. He can't be around people chewing, and his personality, he's very casually, unthinkingly cruel, as she puts it. Like, not really thinking about what he says, and is not very considerate about other people's feelings. And it also, through Amy's pregnancy, it does address the issue of pregnant women with cerebral palsy. They are considered a higher risk, and so they end up requiring more checkups and testing. And as far as how this book can be incorporated into library programming, I think that this book is a great candidate for young adult book clubs, because I definitely think that it deals with a lot of issues that would be great for young people to talk about, such as people with disabilities and special needs having relationships and making friendships, and how to react to that, how to respond to that. Even just the very issue of romance itself and sex and pregnancy. I mean, I've worked in special education for the last 13 years, and I've worked with many students that did have cerebral palsy, and I don't think I've ever pondered the notion of any of them ever becoming a parent in any sort of way. If a library wants to pursue outreach to people with special needs and disabilities in their community, I think it would be great to have an event where there's a public reading from at least even a section of this book, and have a public reading be done by either the author herself or notable authors that have cerebral palsy, or notable figures in the community that have cerebral palsy. And even, I mean, this would be much more of a long shot, but I guess you could say that it doesn't hurt to try, is even reaching out to celebrities that have cerebral palsy and seeing that if they would be willing to come to a library and do a reading of the book. All right, well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and take care.